Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. Now for this week, I don't really have that much news when it comes to EVE Online. Some of the things that I did notice is that there's like a super capital fleet that's moving closer to Imperium space, so we could get a pretty big battle that could, if it does happen, be very interesting for minerals. Something else is that at the moment the proving grounds that are up and running is for the corvettes, so super accessible as well, although it's 5 versus 5, so you do need a couple of friends there, but cost wise it is of course next to nothing. Could be pretty interesting. CCP is apparently also planning to stream that, and other than that, honestly, I think we are still looking at the fall of Nyarja and its impact on the market that could be of interest here. So let's take a look at the New Eden store, see what's happening over here. We get actually a sale on Omega, all right, 425 plex instead of 500 for 30 days game time. I don't think I've ever actually seen that in the New Eden store, and it immediately explains one of the ticker events. I thought, what the hell is happening? This is a pretty quick turnaround. We do see a sharp rise in plex. This of course is going to increase demand substantially, as you can now have 30 days game time for only 425 plex. We got a couple of bundles front and center. We still have the Blue Star Defenders skins for the Edencom ships that are here as well, tagged as new, and other than that we don't see anything too special. But this is definitely a very unique sale because it doesn't necessarily have to cost your wallet. Actually, your in-game assets can be well spent at the moment with a pretty nice discount on 30 days Omega clone time for only 425 plex instead of the normal 500. So I think a lot of people will be jumping on that. That means that we get to move on to the market, and right away we'll start with plex and stuff. That's coming in at 220. Let's write down those tags, 220. So you can see here sellers of plex coming in at 2.8 million, buyers in the Jita station itself, of course, almost 2.7 million. That is a pretty sharp rise all of a sudden. In the player-owned trade hubs, they're actually going for a higher price, 2.85 million for the sellers. So this is definitely some very new activity. Someone dumping plex at 2.8 million, basically. Very interesting to see that. And then down here, buyers go up to more than 2.7 million. Very visible on the chart as well. Look at that sharp rise, 2.8 million. Let's try to get that to show somewhere around here. That is nice, but of course this has a logical explanation that we just saw. People can turn their plex into Omega time at a nice discount. This is bound to, of course, increase demand substantially. People, I think, will rather spend their ISK right now, turn it into plex and get that Omega time, that cheap Omega time locked in, rather than the opposite. So I'm not sure how long this will last for, if this will be sustainable, and if the end of the summer is part of this impact, or if we will see a continued increase or a stabilization, or actually a fallback, as this could also front load a lot of demand, of course, that could then have an impact on a possible recovery, for instance after the summer. If everyone jumps on this occasion, buys plex, turns it into Omega time, perhaps even for the rest of the year, that could mean that we could get even lower prices for plex. So we definitely have a slight sell opportunity for those that want profit right now, but for the longer term it is very difficult to say what the impact will be. I kind of would not be surprised if we could then see a lack of demand, no real recovery after the summer, and a decrease of the price again, and continuing at that 2.5 million barrier or something like that. On the other hand, if there is lower activity during the summer, it could all be alright because of the demand for returning players, but it's difficult to say. Next up here, let's take a look at the multiple pilot train certificate that follows suit a little bit, definitely boosting back above 1.3 billion for the average price, above 1.4 billion for the sellers, and almost 1.3 billion for the buyers. Next up, the skill extractors. Following suit, of course, was below 300 million for quite a bit, and now jumping up to 330 million, almost 324 to 325 for the sellers, and the buyers were coming in at 307 million, and I think in JITA itself 334 million. So compared to that average price here that was below 300 million, we do have a jump in sell prices of like 10% or more in the skill extractors as well. And this is where it makes me very curious. Do we see an immediate impact on the skill injectors? I kind of don't expect it. There should be a little bit of like leftover in the system there to keep it stable, but let's take a look. Large scale injectors, yeah, that's kind of as I was expecting last week. We're already slowly going up, and we're just continuing that slow upturn for the 5-day moving average, so we gotta be careful here. 695 million for the sellers, still below 700 million, buyers coming in at 665. This is definitely showing signs of a bottom, but how sustainable will that be? I don't know. This could be just a temporary bubble because of the nature of the sale, of course. Small scale injectors are already stabilizing just above 140 million ISK, 144 million for the sellers, 131 million for the buyers. That's actually a really decently narrow margin between sellers and buyers that of course leaves room to go either way. On increased demand, we could actually see that pressure mount up and then we could go up, but at the moment it's definitely not happening, and we have this hesitation in the small scale injectors. It must also be said, of course, that CCP is decently generous with SP still at the moment, so there's bound to be a little bit less demand because of that. But really, I have an investment, a small investment in a small scale injector and a large scale injector, and waiting for that turnaround could take a little bit of time. It is going to be interesting to see how Plex will respond in the coming weeks after the sale actually ends. Then we have the daily alpha injectors that are, yeah, again doing the exact opposite of, for instance, the large scale injectors, going back down in price from around 40 million at the start of the month down towards 35 million at the moment. 36.5 million for the sellers and 32 million for the buyers. Definitely showing that difference in markets between these two. Daily alpha injectors only for the alpha clones daily, and the large scale injectors for omega clones as well. They do really work very independently from one another, and here actually you could say that this Plex sale will increase the percentage of omega players active on the server, should decrease the interest in the daily alpha injectors, and so from that standpoint this decline that is actually seeming to accelerate at the end here could be normal. Sale comes up, there's far less demand for daily alpha injectors, and so that price goes down. And then if you think that this might be a temporary bubble that will get absorbed, then this should also be a temporary decrease that could be taken advantage of. It is a bit of a gamble, and the percentages are not that great, but potentially there is basically a small wave that's happening here that could be taken advantage of. Then we finally have the hypercores that did that little jump last week and are now staying at this current range, probably around 290. Yep, 290,000 for the sellers, 265,000 for the buyers. Let's move on to the mineral market, and that's coming in at 855. Like that, and you can see that titanium did move back down a little bit after touching 8 ISK on the daily averages, almost touching that as well on the 5-day moving average, and currently we are selling in JITA for 7.8 ISK. Buyers are coming in at 755. That's a very narrow margin, and look at that, just 3 sell orders and we're back above 8 ISK. So it really doesn't take that much to bring us back to 8.10. Here we do have like 500 million units that are waiting to be sold before we can go even higher, but get through that, 820, 830 comes into view very quickly. So quite a bit of sell competition at the moment, and I'll be honest here, I also sold like most of my holdings in minerals, compressed ores and things like that. Part of my reasoning is maybe a little bit early. If there is a super capital fight that does happen in the war, will definitely be early. We could see a massive spike because of that. But people are starting to rattle me a little bit with their calls for JITA to be invaded by Triglavians, and I'm getting less and less convinced that this won't happen. And so I was kind of thinking, well, if I can get rid of some of the bulkier stuff already, because we may at some point need to then evacuate JITA if that happens, and you don't want to be stuck with huge tonnage of stuff that will be very difficult to move if that ever happens. So I basically lighted my load by quite a bit by getting rid of some of the bulky items in JITA as a just in case move. I felt like, you know, all these minerals are decently high. Titanium is in a great spot, Mexilon is in a great spot, so might as well take advantage of that peak. And if JITA doesn't get invaded and doesn't fall, we could, you know, ride another wave at some point or something like that. But who knows? With the CCP at the moment, they're really silent on their plans, on what's happening, and the invasions they keep going. And I'll be honest, if that does happen, it would be such a massive event on a scale I don't think ever seen in EVE Online. And if you kind of want to make headlines or something like that, a successful Triglavian invasion of JITA would do exactly that, because a lot of players have a lot of stuff here, and that would just be pandemonium. It would just be so crazy, and it's possible. So yeah, kind of like a preparation here for potentially an invasion of JITA by the Triglavians. Just making sure that if something were to happen, I can still in a reasonable fashion get most of my stuff out. Ships, you know, you can fly them out normally, and the rest of the stuff that I have here actually is not that large in volumes. Next up, we've got pyrite that is still selling for 6.10 ISK, bars at 570. Also pretty narrow margin, as the decrease in price is clearly slowing down. Average price is below 6 ISK though, so we definitely have to had to give back quite a bit of room here. And well, this is what I would call the bad news. Still 45 million, 75 million, 160 million, and almost 400 million units here at 625. That is quite a bit of volume for pyrite to still get through, but it's not as bad as before, and so we are stopping our descent. I would say that that's good news as well, of course. Then we've got Mexilon that is slowly declining below 90 ISK now as the average price. This is an incredibly good price, very strong. Managing to maintain that for so long is actually really impressive. Started right here in late May, had to give back a little bit right here in June, but then that went up to 100 ISK in July, and there still does seem to be very strong demand for Mexilon. Most sellers in fact at 91.5 ISK, buyers coming in at 83.46, so they are trying to drag the price back down a little bit, but demand seems to be high enough that the average prices are staying decently close to 90 ISK on a lot of days. After that, we've got Isogen that, well, also, you know, this 5-day moving average, you can see going back above the 20-day moving average. It looks like we're also stalling our pullback in price here, which is quite a bit more shallow, 25 to perhaps 23 ISK or something like that. It's 23.5 for the sellers and 21.67 almost for the buyers. So we also have a slowdown in the loss of gains. You could say that doesn't make sense, but too much sense, but we do have a slowdown in the activity on basically all of them, right? The ones that are going down in price or slowing down and stabilizing. The ones that are really high in price are slowly giving some of those prices back, but it's all really still in a very great place, in my opinion, to be selling and to focus on mining Focus, of course, on titanium and Mexalon for now, and potentially, if you can, Noxium, which does a 1, 2, now a third step back up to another 1-year high point and staying above 600 ISK for the average prices. Very impressive. 613 for the sellers, 545 for the buyers. I think a bit of supply is starting to creep this back down. Today's daily average so far is actually below 600 ISK, but what I notice here, 11,000 units. Less than 100,000. Here we get 2 million, 3 million units. This feels like it is doable for the market to absorb this and to, just like with what happened with Mexalon, maintain these 1-year high prices for quite a little bit. So Noxium is still also one of your focuses, I think, if you can, of course, for your mining. After that, we've got our non-stick minerals. Here is Zydrine that is staying above 1,000 ISK. Very impressive performance here. 100% increase over the start of the year. 1,072 ISK for the sellers, 1,000 ISK for the buyers. So very comfortably above 1,000 ISK on the average prices. And this is really impressive, also showing the revaluation that happened after they got taken out, mostly I think out of the moon mining mix there, re-increasing the effort needed to create Zydrine, and that of course massively increased the price. Mexalon has then struggled a little bit with that. Not Mexalon, but Megasite is what I want to say. Actually went back to less than 500 ISK, and here I would say that this is again market speculation. People saying below 500 ISK, that does sound a little bit cheap, especially if we look at Zydrine. So you get this massive volume spike here a day ago that has pushed the price for the sellers back up to 550 almost. Buyers though 384 ISK, so that's a very wide margin here between sellers and buyers, and it is, in my opinion, very difficult to speculate on exactly where this is going, because I still don't have the exact explanation as to why Megasite is lagging behind so much on Zydrine. Historically speaking, Megasite has been more expensive than Zydrine here. So this is a very big investment, probably close to everything below 550. 558, 553 here. So all of this hasn't been bought, and then since then we get a couple of decently small volume sell orders going back below 550 here, competing with one another. But this is, in my opinion, a pretty big investment that could be correct if CCP does want to revalue things, then perhaps increasing the need of Megasite or turning down whatever is still open and that is still creating all of that Megasite could still be on the horizon. And then finally we've got the Morphite market that is really starting to go back down here, heading towards 10,000 ISK on today's daily average. Makes it a lot more interesting, of course. 11,870 for the sellers, 10,000 ISK for the buyers. A wider and wider margin opening up here, but a very good last 6 to 8 months for Morphite with crazy prices. 15,000 ISK, 17,500, even peaks at 20,000 ISK. Is really, really good. And now, well, for people that like this chart, I think it is starting to look good to slowly look at buying Morphite. I personally would wait for buyers to drop below 10,000 ISK. Then I personally feel like you've got something that will inevitably get you a profit at some point in the future. But this is a very, very impressive performance for Morphite. And the year before this, we had actually prices that had been sustained below 10,000 ISK for months and months on end. And if we had the patience, we would have doubled our risk on the investments that we made back then. Looking at the tail end of this chart, we have some more momentum on the downtrend. So who knows, perhaps a next investment opportunity could be on the horizon. Next up, the PI market coming in at 1840. There we go, and well, we'll start as always with the broadcast notes. And all right, finally, well, you could say finally another pullback, but keep in mind this is from yet another 1-year low point. We've had a couple of these below 1.75 million before. We do see the volumes steadily increase and already decrease at the tail end. as we stayed below 2 million ISK, and we are at 1.95 million. So just below 2 million for the sellers, 1.8 million for the buyers. They have been forced up a little bit, but I'm reading the same pattern as on this increase in price. We're basically seeing investments being made at a 1-year low point. I would say that these are pretty damn smart, although the earlier ones maybe a little bit early, but you're grabbing really cheap broadcast nodes, and the buyers know not to push back towards that 2 million too closely. That's the average price for broadcast nodes, so they're really only buying the best stuff. Basically, this little downward push here has been bought up with these volumes and brings us back to a less than average price. So they're very, very careful at the moment. Oh, I clicked on that. Do I have to repin it? There we go. Now it looks a little bit better. Next up, we've got the construction blocks that have made their way back above 10,000 ISK. Actually, looking at the 1-year chart, this is getting closer and closer to an above average price, but its real average, I would say, for construction blocks is 10,500 to 11,000 ISK. So this still is not that great a price. It's 10,500 for one seller, 11,000 for the next ones. That's good. And this is the better news. 10,300 ISK for the buyers. This, in my opinion, is a sort of a sign of more activity coming back to the game, because this is a very reasonable amount of buy orders compared to these sell orders. Will it stick? That's going to be the real question, but this is actually, in my opinion, the first sign of a comeback of demand as well, that is driving prices at least somewhat closer to average prices. Get rid of this one guy, 11,000 for the sellers, and we are pretty damn close to an average construction block price range. Consumer electronics showing that it is definitely not uniform across the board. While I would say that almost 12,500 ISK would be a normal price for consumer electronics, you can see that we're back down to less than 10,000 ISK. Not at the 1-year low point, but substantially below that on the sellers, 9,800 for the first one and 9,600 for the buyers. It is still a very bad price. And here, these are the buyers for these sellers. So that is showing that an increased demand is not here across the board yet. Coolants are slowly trying to move back up towards 10,000 ISK, 9,800 for the sellers, 8,700 for the buyers. That's still a pretty wide margin, although here I'm seeing, yeah, again, no, there is some new demand here, but it is, well, actually, we have to be honest here, last 24 hours from 8,200 up to 8,700. So maybe a first little breadcrumb of increased demand that is definitely stemming the bleeding. We also have a volume spike here, so another investment at or close to 1-year low points here, and we're slowly driving the price back up, but very, very carefully apparently. Nowhere near the 11,000 or something like that we could easily get as the average price in the first half of the year. Cryoprotectant Solutions is alright, carefully pulling up from 100,000 ISK as well. 110,000 for the sellers, 105,000 for the buyers. Here I would say again that if you want that longer term investment waiting for a next set of implants, try to buy everything that's at a real discount, so definitely below 100,000 ISK. I think you'll get occasions from time to time, and now we're in that wavy pattern. As in my opinion, we touched that 100,000, so we get buyers below that, then you get a bit of a volume spike for people buying that cheapest stuff, but they also know there's no reason to push it up to 150 or anything like that at the moment. So again, that careful investment does seem to be happening at the moment. Enriched uranium actually really struggling, but able to stay above 10,000 ISK, 10,400 for the sellers, and just below 10,000 ISK for the buyers. Yeah, look at this 1-year chart. It's obviously also a pretty bad price. Are we seeing some competition on the buyers here? Not enough. No, next to nothing in the last 24 hours, in fact. Integrity response drones are also, volume increase, but same pattern, staying well away from the 2 million price range and coming from 1.6 million, a 1-year low point. 1.95 million almost for these sellers, 1.8 million for the buyers. So a bit of pushback again, but they're being very careful. Integrity response drones, 2.2, 2.3 million average, something like that. Normally, we are definitely again at these really low prices, and people are making the right investments. I'm very impressed by the restraint basically of the market at the moment here. Mechanical parts, more bad news unfortunately, diving back down below 10,000 ISK, 10,700 for the sellers, but less than 10k for the buyers, and apparently dumping to buyers is happening if you're getting these average prices. But it must also be said that for mechanical parts, this is not that bad. This is easily produced on barren planets. I would not say that like for which is enriched uranium, for instance, that can easily normally ask 12,500 and up for an average price. Mechanical parts above 10,000 ISK is not that bad, so keep that in mind. They're not all as easy or difficult to produce. They definitely have different ranges as their averages. Then we've got the nanites with the same pattern as our cryoprotectant solutions, and also pulling up from that 5,000 ISK. So this chart to me does also mean that if I would see buyers of nanites below 5,000 ISK, they're at 5,600, that's where I would try to make a move on this, and 6,300 for the sellers at the moment. So a bit too early. We're right around, or maybe a slight bit above the normal average, but for the longer term, again, this ought to be a good investment if you're expecting a new set of implants at some point. Nano factories, this is even more surprising, right? Definitely below average, well below a million ISK at the moment. We do have the volume spikes, and it's not even registering on the average prices. Less than 900,000 for the sellers, 840,000 for the buyers. And so there are some investors buying and selling these nano factories, but it's not even moving. So even these volume spikes ought to be basically not enough compared to what's available on the market. And yeah, weird stuff to see spikes like this happen and then not to see a price response. Organic mortar applicators are in the same story as most of them so far in the advanced PI materials. So we reached yet another 1 year low point. In fact, we've got daily averages that are getting close to 700,000 ISK for something that normally costs over a million ISK. And we jump back up to 950,000. Buyers are at 840,000. So we again have the volumes over the last couple of days. Investors buying the very cheapest stuff, but at around 900,000 ISK, they're definitely stalling their purchases, and so they again just focus on the very cheapest organic mortar applicators. Recursive computing is actually doing a lot better. One of the exceptions in advanced planetary materials that is actually around its average price, maybe even a touch above that, at 1.65 million for the sellers and almost 1.6 million for the buyers. Also on some more volumes, so some investments are definitely happening. What could be happening is, of course, I think a first Keepstar blew up, if I'm not mistaken, in the war, and so people are already looking at perhaps for the alliances themselves or as investments towards a rebuilding effort requiring some of these advanced PI materials. Robotics is continuing the bad news. 5-day moving average still below 80,000 ISK. 83,000 for the sellers, 80,000 for the first buyers. This is very, very cheap, of course. If you're looking for that potential investment, this is below the entire chart. Buy as close as possible to 80k, and normal price for robotics around 100,000 ISK, so that's an easy 20% potential margin right there. Self-harmonizing power cores, not that much on volumes, but actually making its way back to 2 million ISK. We haven't seen that in a very long time. 2 million for the sellers, 1.9 million almost for the buyers. So that's a pretty substantial jump back up as well here, and it's back on almost at an average price for self-harmonizing power cores. So definitely that increase is back and almost uniform across advanced PI materials, but will it sustain? That's what's going to be really interesting. This is basically also, I think, dependent on increased activity in EVE Online after the summer. It could happen. Sterile conduits, very impressive in fact. Look at the investments here. You get the volumes But notice where we come from, 900,000 disk as a 1-year low point. And then here most activity has been around 1.3, 1.25 million. And we actually here shoot to almost 1.35 million for the sellers. In fact, close to 1.4 million for most of them. Buyers at 1.2 million. This is a really big move all of a sudden in sterile conduits. Those that went in early and bought below a million ISK, I think will have by far the best deal. But this is going to make it very interesting for the upcoming weeks. Can some of these sustain that average price? Well, it depends. As I've said, it depends on activity, I think, and the Nullsec war plays a part in all of this as well. All to be interesting. Ukome superconductors staying well away from that 50k 1-year low point, 75,000 for the sellers, almost 70,000 for the buyers. So that's definitely too early for an investment as well. And then finally we get the wetware mainframes that have also got some volumes, but a very limited boost in price towards 1.75 million, a bit above that for the sellers, 1.65 for the buyers. Normal price at least 2 million for wetware mainframes. And I'm again going to give this one note. In my experience, during the very first real boom in advanced, god damn it. And that brings us to the advanced move materials. Bit of an interruption by an unexpected phone call, but it's fine. Let's move on to these advanced move materials. And here we are going to try to redo things the old way. So I think we always focused on the carbide materials first. A request, so I'll try to honor that. This time maybe it's in a different order, but let's start here with crystalline carbonides for the Galente that are actually going up in price back towards 150 ISK almost for the sellers, 144 for the buyers. So here you could say that we are coming off of 1-year low points down to 125, and thus potentially very cheap materials for the production of Galente ships. After that we have our 2.1, which is titanium carbide for Caldari ships. That is, well, today's daily average is heading for 175. We're talking 172 for the sellers and 155 for the buyers. Definitely, I would still call this well below average, so pretty much on the cheap side, but at least we're bouncing back up towards that 175 range. After that we have, what did I choose here? Fernite carbide for Minmatar ships. Bit of a bounce from a 1-year low point, but still under pressure by quite a bit. 130 for the sellers, 116 for the buyers. That is actually really cheap at the moment, I would say. And then we have the tungsten carbide market that's actually playing with 1-year low points at the moment. 165 for the sellers and 162 for the buyers. Normally we should be above 175. So I would say that Amar and Minmatar seem to be on the very cheap side. Could even be close to 1-year low point and investment worthy, especially the tungsten carbide. Then we have the metamaterials. So I went with, nope, that's Caldari. Let's see, 2.1. Where did I put that? 1.2. That's what I need. Photonic metamaterials for the, I may for the next one go just 1 and 2 for Galente, and then like that for each race. I'm not really sure. So photonic metamaterials for Galente production actually going down in price back below 15,000 ISK. 14,700 for the first seller, just below 15,000 for most, 13,700, and then quickly down to 500 for the buyers. That seems to be pretty cheap. And then yeah, maybe we'll really have to do that, because look at that, crystalline carbonate going up in price and the photonic metamaterials going back down in price. Definitely a difference in activity here, and depending on what you need, potentially there are definitely opportunities here. After that we have the non-linear metamaterials for Caldari ships staying below 20,000 ISK, so definitely on the cheap side here. 19,800 for the sellers, 16,250 for the buyers. That's a really decently large margin here as well. And let me take a quick look at what was happening. 2.1 titanium carbide, actually also a difference in activity. The titanium carbide is going back up in price, and then the non-linear metamaterials are going down in price towards 1-year low points. So Amar and Minmatar were going down in price, and my 3.1 is Minmatar, so my 3.2 is here, plus Monic Metamaterials, 1 year low point here as well. Very interesting. 17,100 for the sellers, less than 16,000 for the buyers. That looks like something that you could jump in on for some very cheap ones. And then terahertz metamaterials for the Amar, also below 17,500, so really cheap as well. Less than 17,000 effect for the buyers on a complete lack of demand. One thing of note, of course, is that JITA and Amar are a lot further away from each other, and so this could also be seen as perhaps there is less demand around JITA for manufacturing. If industry would start to relocate towards other trade hubs, this could be become the new normal. But considering the 1 year charts here, you could also see this as quite a few investment opportunities, specifically in most of the metamaterials. In fact, almost all of them are close to 1 year low points, and then specifically for Amar and Minmatar ships, even the carbides are pretty damn low. Then we get some other advanced materials like fermionic condensates also going back down in price towards 80,000 ISK, 81,000 for the sellers, 71,000 for the buyers. Pretty wide margin here as well, going all the way down here for the buyers. Ferrogel showing that continued pressure as well, heading down to 35,000. Not yet a 1 year low point, but 36,000 for the sellers, 35,000 for the buyers. Definitely well below average. Fullerite's unstoppably going back down as well, despite the fact that most of the year, almost most of the year, was spent above 1,000 ISK, which was above its average price. Now the decline is just unstoppable. 850 ISK for the sellers, 800 ISK for the buyers. If you try and get that on the chart, 1 year low point, definitely buying below the entire chart again. Hypersynaptic fibers back under pressure, playing with that 10K, 9,800 for the buyers. So this is also close to a 1 year low point. This is really not a good week if you're looking for high prices in advanced materials. Nanotransistors continuing to hover at that 5,000 low end of its trade range. Phenolic composites did a bit of a jump from a 1 year low point and is already going back down. Less than 1,700 for the sellers, 1,629 for the first buyer. It's not the low point, but clearly well below average. And then we get ceramic fibers, our one exception here, trying to head back for 400 ISK, 390 for the sellers, 398 for the next one, and then 355, still a pretty wide margin. So advanced materials are clearly struggling, I would say a lack of demand. And then the question is it because this is a normal cycle? Perhaps the war is taking some industrial activity out of the equation, or do you think that the fall of Niaja may be part of the reason? It's very difficult to say, and this could thus be a pretty big gamble if there is a big recovery, or perhaps even some people think a massive consolidation towards JITA for more activity. Then this could be an incredible opportunity to jump in on some cheap advanced materials. But if there's more decentralization on the horizon or a Triglavian invasion of JITA, then of course this is very risky. Let's take a look at the impact on the Tech 2 ships, and yeah, I'm gonna try to 3950 on my current counter, but I'll have to edit this out a little bit, so we'll see. I'll put the timestamps below, but let's get started. Here is the Basilisk actually stalling its descent well above 200 million ISK here. 200 million for most sellers, 210 very quickly, and then 187 million for the buyers. It's not that much demand, so it's pretty cheap for the buyers, but the sell prices are still very, very reasonable. Cerberus is trying to make its way back to 230 million as well already. 220 for the sellers, above 200 million for the buyers is also, I mean, it's a bit below average, but it is not a 1 year low point. It's definitely a reasonable price both for sellers and buyers. After that, we have the Guardian. This one is going down, and this is getting close to a 1 year low point. That's a lot more interesting. 192 million for the sellers, 173 93 million for the buyers. This is your opportunity to grab very cheap Guardians, well below 180, and I think a Guardian ready at 184 that I'd consider to be an opportunity. Look at the spikes: 230, 250, 250, even 300 million on a lot of demand for Armor Logi. This is of course very pronounced. You have potentially a very cheap Guardian here. I would definitely try to do so if you don't have one yet. The Hound is also going down in price substantially, going well below 25 million here. Less than 22 million for the first seller, 21.7 million also for the buyers. You can basically grab some of these and buy Hounds below 22 million ISK, which I think is not that bad looking at this entire chart. Potentially another one for you to consider starting your Tech 2 investments in, but you do take that extra gamble. Of course, no advanced materials are under pressure, and what's really happening with the market, we are in a pretty uncertain period. Is there an impact on the Ikitursa? Slightly down in average prices, landing on that 400 million ISK range, 413 for the sellers, 375 million for the buyers, but nothing too major, which is a bit of a surprise, although they probably, if I go look for the industry tab here, some more fight rams, we need that. I think titanium armor plates, but a lot of it is also Triglavian stuff, so that's probably why the decrease in advanced materials is not showing up here just yet. For the Ishtar, we're staying helpfully above 230 here as well, 232 for the sellers, 207 million for the buyers, definitely in a reasonable range. After that we have the Manticore that is continuing its slow decline, but not as hurriedly as the Hound here. Manticore is going for 26, almost 27 million for the sellers, still a decent amount here. Less than 25 million for the buyers. If you try to get 25 to show up, it's not a 1 year low point, but for the last 9 months or so it has been. So this is your choice to make. I personally would have a bit more patience and would feel a lot better grabbing a Guardian or a couple of Hounds. Then we have the Munin that is definitely dropping off to a 1 year low point as well. 190 million for the first seller, less than 180 million for the buyers. Definitely worth looking to grabbing one cheap Munin. Potentially, you know from this spike that it is still a nullsec doctrine as well, and so on some massive activity you could be in for a good sale then. The Nemesis dropping off towards a 1 year low point again, heading for 20 million average price, 21 million for the sellers, 20 million for the buyers. Basically there's still 100 here. I think over the course of the week this could drop off into less than 20 million for the buyers, and that is when I think you could make a move on some really cheap Nemesis stealth bombers. Oneros continuing to hover at that 1 year low point as well, 151 million for the seller buyers, 161 for the buyers. Very, very cheap. I would not blame anyone to have at least one of them. I would never risk more than one of them though, because of the terrible volumes. Then for production, the Panther finally showing first signs of breaking down as well. So I would say that this is exactly why I wanted these battleships in the new lineup for the Tech 2 ships. Keep an eye on potential production costs and margins. And here, average price in the last couple of days, 5-day moving average definitely going back down as well, below 1.1 billion, 1.15 billion for the sellers, less than 1.1 billion for the buyers. A bit of pressure, so I would say that we are seeing lower production costs at the moment for Tech 2 ships. It's very likely. The Purifier is down to a 1 year low point, breaking to less than 25 million, 23.5, 23.7 million, with still 266 right here for sale, 22 million for the buyers. You could start now, or you could have a little bit of patience, because this will keep things in check, and so we could drop off to even lower buyers for the Purifier. This is of course also already a really cheap price. Then we get the Scimitar that is also still below 200 million ISK on average, 194 for the sellers, 174 for the buyers. Same thing as with the Oneros in my opinion. You could definitely justify trying to buy one from the buyers right now, but the volumes will make it a little bit harder. On the other hand, you do have a lovely war spike here as well, so Shield Logi still on the books as well. And then we've got the Widow that is, in my opinion, confirming the lower production costs at the moment, heading for a billion ISK on a couple of days as the average price. Less than 1.1 billion for the first seller, very close to that for most, and then less than a billion for the buyers. A bit of a lack of demand is playing its part as well, but you can see that you don't just bring massive amounts of Panthers, you're bringing those to the market after you've produced them. And you can clearly see, in my opinion here, that people are willing to sell them at lower prices, probably because they can make them at lower prices as well. And then finally, we've got the Zealot that is finally starting to form a bit of a bottom at a very pronounced 1-year low point, was close to 180. Currently 210 million almost for the sellers, 184 million for the buyers, still pretty low as well. So take two ships, there are definitely some really cheap ones there, potentially very good buy opportunities. I personally love the Hound, and of course that Guardian lack of buyers is something that really, if you can take advantage of that, I think you've got a great purchase. Next up, the Tech Tree markets coming in at 47 here. I'm gonna write that down a little bit differently. We'll see how I work it out. Let's get started here, right? Confessor had that big spike, and I thought that this would become a wave that would ripple through all of them, but look at that massive jump back down here. Really basically a 1 week spike, almost back down to less than 40 million ISK for the average price, 39 million for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers, back in basically normal territory. This is really on a very short notice that this happened. That means that we could expect a lower activity in the rest, and so the Hecate is already basically going back down well below 50 million. Is probably gonna easily normalize towards 40 million, 46 million still for the sellers, 41 million for the buyers. But this is the last 24 hours. You can see, what would that be, 2 full front pages. Pretty shy in volumes, but they're definitely starting to put more and more pressure on the price already. Then we've got the Jackdaw that is, yeah, I thought it was in investment range last week, but 39 million for the sellers, 36 million for the buyers is still basically the same price. And so the Hecate gap is being plugged very quickly. The Confessor gap has been plugged way sooner than I thought. And so this means that I still think buying a Jackdaw for around 36 million is not a bad purchase, but you're not gonna get that you're not gonna ride that Confessor wave that turned out to be a bit like a dud, to be honest. And now we've got this Vapel, that is the one that did apparently ride that wave, going back above 40 million, 41 million for the sellers, 36 million on the buyers. And here we can clearly see a bit of a lack of supply that is causing this price resurgence. So for now, honestly, I don't really have that much of expectations. You could still try. I don't think it's that bad an idea to try the Jackdaw for 36 million. It is, in my opinion, the best tactical destroyer, and at the moment it's the cheapest one, so that should potentially correct itself at some point, but I thought that the Confessor would really be the trigger for that, as it should have absorbed more supply than it did. The Hecate is now going to absorb any extra supply at the moment, but it's already really quickly normalizing, and so as a result I don't think we'll see like a big boost for the Jackdaw for 50 million or anything like that anytime soon. On the other hand, it is by now the cheapest one. I think it is flown in nullsec, and so a purchase spree could happen, right? You can definitely buy quite a few Jackdaws already at less than 40 million. If people see that interest, we're bound to see a bigger spike. It could still happen, but unfortunately it not as predictably, because I feel like this spike for the Confessor died down unnaturally quickly. We still have a couple of cruisers left here as well. Here is the Legion, flat at its current range. There's really not much to say. It's super cheap. Where are those buyers? Less than 130 million. Very cheap Legions. The Loki, flat, close to its 1 year low point as well. Well below 150 million. Buyers at 131. Very, very cheap Lokis at the moment. Although not a lot of them, right? 26 here is reasonable, but it's not that many of them. Legion, not that many of them. Then we get the Proteus, dives down to 130, getting close to 1 year low point here as well. 132 million for the sellers, less than 120 million for the buyers. I don't think I have a cheap Proteus just yet. I could just maybe invest in that. I have a cheap Legion, I have a cheap Loki, and then the Tengu is basically settling around the 150 range with buyers at 135. For the cruisers, it is right now really, really cheap. There's a bit of extra supply, but not that much. But I personally don't see this. This is, for instance, this is to me really unnatural, very strange. Last 24 hours, 2 sell orders, 2 ships, and then volumes here, 1s and 2s, 3 here, 6 here, that's it. And this is driving the Proteus down to a 1 year low point. That is just, that feels nuts to me. So I would not blame anyone for buying one Proteus right now at the cheapest possible buy price, but keep in mind all of this feels like there is manipulation at hand, and so I would not make big investments here. I would just try to ride those waves and try to time one sell. I think that is possible, but if you buy now, if you're thinking, well, this is the time I'm actually going to buy a dozen Protea, you're gonna get stuck with those for a very, very long time. So the Tech 3 cruisers, super cheap across the board, but be very careful with what you do here, in my opinion, because this doesn't look normal that you can reach that 1 year low point of 130 million on these kinds of volumes, this kind of supply. That just doesn't register as normal for me personally. And then I still have to choose an extra product actually, and perhaps we'll do a faction. Yeah, all right. Faction cruisers, right? Very popular ships, some very powerful ships, always interesting to take a look at those, and I'll write down a timestamp that I'll need to fix afterwards anyways, like that. And let's go here. So we're talking ships, cruisers, faction cruisers. Let's start with we usually start with the pirate faction. So here's the Ashimu selling for 59 million, buyers are at 52 million. Around average, actually, not a bad spot for the Ashimu. Any spike from my videos, not sure, was it here in July? Perhaps. I still feel like this was a very cheap pirate faction cruiser that managed to do its job in exploration. So it was basically like super cheap alternative, because less than 60 million, let's keep that in mind. Then we go to the Cinnabal, 130 million plus, slightly below average, 130 million for the sellers, 120 for the buyers, but yeah, double the price of the Ashimu. Then we get the Ortrus, that's going for also a below average price, but what's its range? 192 million for the sellers, 172 for the buyers. Explotrus is a great ship for that activity as well. Definitely getting very close to the Gila in performance, in my opinion. Then we've got the Phantasm, another laser platform, definitely a little bit harder in my opinion for PvE, but for PvP this is potentially a super strong ship, especially in a fleet scenario, and it's down to 90 million, which is right around its average. 93 million for the sellers and 83 million for the buyers. Then the Stradios definitely has its uses as well, but again, 180 million, right around average at the moment, I would say. 183 million for the sellers and 164 for the buyers. Yeah, you can buy 3 Ashimus for a single Stradios. Must be said, of course, exploration bonuses, covered ops, so it is an incredible ship. It's normal that you're buying that premium. And then the Gila last time was actually at a 1 year low point, and it is still there. You're paying less for a Gila than you are for a Stradios. That is kind of interesting. 160 million for the sellers, less than 150 for the buyers. I would almost dare to buy 1 or 2 as an investment at this point. This is very pronounced and very sustained at its 1 year low point. It's also the ship for the Abyss, so perhaps production has been ramped up because of that, but if something disrupts that ever, then that could of course be very profitable. And finally we get the Vigilant, that is 179 million for the sellers, 160 million for the buyers, right around its average as well. So the pirate faction ships seem to be doing okay. Most of them are on average, and what's noticeable is that the Gila actually is very low at the moment. So if you want to have a Gila, which I personally love for some high-sec exploration, you can definitely buy one at a more than reasonable price. Then we get our Navy faction ships. Oh, yeah, it's been a long time since I actually went and took a look at a need income ship. Here is the Stormbringer, flat below 130 million, oh, 100 million, less than that for the sellers, 86 million for the buyers. So basically it's found its range, and this is a normal price, I would say, for a faction cruiser, perhaps even on the cheap side, because at the moment people are basically not seeing those as being competitive. The weapon system might need some tuning. I personally would think if you want to fix that, perhaps have a bit of like a fall off in damage as you get to more bounces, so that you can at least try to still primary something and then still have that effect, but not have that be so uniform. I think at the moment it just does the same damage for all its 5 bounces. Something like that could potentially make the Stormbringer, I think, a bit more usable, because of course focusing your fire on the right target is very important, both in PvP and in PvE, and at the moment you just don't really have that. Augur Navy issue, back up in price a little bit. All right, 63 million for the sellers, 52 million for the buyers. Definitely trading above average, meaning rather expensive LP for the Amar so far. Next up, we've got Caracal Navy issue, also trading above average for 60 million ISK, 60 for the sellers and 52 million, 53 million almost for the buyers. Bit above average, so again showing expensive LP. Executor Navy issue, very same story, well above 70 million, 81 million in fact for the sellers, 70 million for the buyers. So I'm expecting this to become a little bit of a trend here. Omen Navy issue, potentially due to a slight lack of popularity, but above average again on the chart, 52 million for the sellers, 47 for the buyers. Osprey Navy issue actually going back up, certainly above average, also actually very useful in exploration, 65 million almost for the sellers, 55 for the buyers. Side fleet issue back down a bit, but coming from a high point. So currently around 50 on average, 50 million for the sellers dictating the prices, pretty obviously. Stabber fleet issue going for around 50 million as well, 55 million here for the sellers, so back up. You can see that right at the tail end here. And then finally we've got the Vixor Navy issue, that's also staying above 50 million ISK, 52 for the sellers, 46 million for the buyers. Navy factions basically above average, so we're talking rather expensive LP from faction warfare, which can also be seen as an opportunity, of course, if you want to go do some PvP and you join a faction. At the moment you're probably getting a pretty nice return for your efforts. So yeah, that's gonna be it for this Eve Talk then, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.